Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to round 2 of our little review show here on my channel. My name is Furo and today we are looking at 7 more cards of the newly announced Hearthstone adventure One Night in KARAZHAN. Unfortunately, all cards I will talk about today are rather pretty dull or uninspired. I know that some people in the community are excited for this type of cards, but if you have played card games long enough like I do, it is pretty baffling why the developers don't put more effort into their cards instead of copying old paper cards or rehashing some of their own cards. Anyway, let's check out the cards for today. We will start with Babbling Book. The book is a 1 mana minion that has weak stats of 1/1 and will give you a random mage spell into your hand. As if Tempo Mage needed another tool to generate random spells, this one will do it perfectly early on. While the stats on this minion are for sure nothing to be excited about, I really like to point out the fact that the card only gives you a random mage spells and not any spell of any class like the Spellslinger does. This increases the possibility to get a good spell out of the card because mage spells are in general pretty good in terms of value and general capabilities, though the card won't destroy your own game plan. The worst card you might get here is the Shatter that will destroy a frozen minion, but even then you should be able to get a bit out of value in the card in combination with a Frostbolt or a Water Elemental. Otherwise there are really no bad spells at all for the mage, but potential good cards for you to get that might surprise your opponent. The card also synergizes with Bronzebeard, however this one is currently played rarely in most mage decks. If Mage is getting more good Battlecry minions and therefore the playability of Bran increases, the Babbling Book will definitely see play as a double copy in those decks. Right now that is not the case, so it has to be seen if and how often the card will be played. The effect is solid for sure, but you shouldn't forget that Mage decks are already packed with stuff that are hard to replace. For a Tempo Mage deck, I would assume that the best sub for the deck will be the slot that is currently taken by the Acolyte of Pain. You will swap the potential of drawing more than one card with the potential of getting an extra great mage spell and having stuff like the Fireball or Frostbolt more than 3 times in your deck. Due to the low stats, the minion won't survive long and also can't beat most of the 2-drops in the game without further help. That is definitely a negative aspect on this board heavy meta, but nonetheless the card is good enough to be seen in some decks. We need to wait and see how widely the book will be included. Our second card is the Malchezaar's Imp, a 1 mana warlock minion with solid stats of 1 attack and 3 life. As long as the minion is on the board, it will give you the ability to draw a card whenever you discard a card. With the card, Blizzard tries again to make a discard lock viable, but they are totally blind for the fact that discard isn't viable in its current form in Hearthstone. Why is it, you might ask? While discarding a card is never something in general that you would like in a card game, nearly every other card game that uses discard mechanics allow the player to choose which card to discard. In Hearthstone on the other hand, the discarding is random and the low amount of card draw possibilities as well as the low amount of cards in hand in most decks over the course of the game makes your hand way too valuable to discard one at random. There are, at least for now, way too little cards that interact with a fictive graveyard where your discarded and destroyed cards would sit. At the moment there is no chance to get any of your discarded cards back or interact with them, so every card you discard is gone forever and might hurt you in the long run of the game. The possible cards that have a discard mechanic on them is currently low as well, and besides 2 outliners won't see any play at all. Opposed to this, I still see the card being used in some Zoolock decks, or at least picked with the Dark Peddler effect. Zoolocks are currently running the only 2 viable discard cards, namely Doomguard and Soulfire. These cards are a natural fit for Zoolock, they are strong and the discard is not that of a hinder for those decks. If the decks are already playing both cards, you can easily play the Imp instead of a Voidwalker. You would lose a Taunt, but would get a minion with the same amount of stats and the possibility to redraw cards and push more to the board. That should work out for Zoolock, so I can see the card in those decks here. Next we have Wyrm, which is a neutral dragon minion that will cost you 6 mana and you get a 3/6 on the board. If you're holding another dragon in hand, the card will allow you to destroy an enemy minion with 3 or less attack. As you might have noticed, the devs just slapped the Shadowbird Pain on some dragon and voila, a new card is born. Card designing is simple. Opposed to the Shadow Word Pain also, you can't target your own minions and need to kill enemy ones. The card will definitely see play in dragon decks, especially if you are playing Priest or Paladin Dragon ones. For 1 mana more than a Stampeding Kodo you get 1 health more, another dragon in the deck for your synergy effects, and you will be able to target a 3 attack minion, which includes a vast majority of creatures instead of the 2 attack of the Kodo. Some might argue that the card is a bit too expensive or slow, and I would agree that some earlier drop with weaker stats but the same effect would be better. But the card is still playable and you should be prepared to see the dragon in action. Personally, I would have made the card a 4 mana minion with probably 2/2 instead, so it would have been very good against aggro decks, as well as a nice mid to late game option. Priest and Paladin will like the card nonetheless. They have tools to reduce minion attack numbers, although for Priest only in wild at the moment, and therefore can kill a wider range of minions. Although Peacekeeper and the Book Dragoon will kill some stuff together, so my Dragon Paladin deck will be ready to use him. Following up, we have a new legendary card, Moroes, a 3 mana neutral minion with very bad stats of 1/1, stealth, and he will summon a 1/1 token at the end of your turn. The card is an ongoing token spawn point due to the stealth keyword, but the stats are so weak that you can't play it in many decks. Without further buffs, the card will die in an instant to all area of effect spells and prominent cards like the warrior minion Ravaging Ghoul, though where will you find the card nonetheless? Right now there should be 2 classes that can support Moroes and help him survive. Based on his high cost for the low stats, he might still not see much play even in both classes. As a potential class we have on the one hand Paladin and on the other hand the Druid as well. Paladin will of course try to use Moroes in a Paladin Divine Shield deck. In combination with a Steward of Darkshire you can theoretically spawn an endless number of 1/1 tokens with Divine Shield. Sounds great, right? Well, how high are the chances that your Steward will survive even 1 turn? Not high in general, plus you can play the combo on turn 6 at the earliest, but Divine Paladin decks are trying to push out pressure from the start of the game and not in the mid to late game. It will definitely be a nice combo when you can establish it for a few rounds, but it is highly unlikely that you would get more value out of those 2 cards than you would have with just playing for example a Billowfin Tidehunter in combination with another 1-drop for the same amount of mana. Druid on the other hand has also a lot of buff possibilities in form of spells like the Power of the Wild or minions like the Adult Grizzly. Adult Grizzly in particular works really great with the card and buffs the 1/1s always to 2/2s. While the buff potential is greater in Druid, the cards faces the same problems. Why should you play those 2 cards when you can play a Wild Teacher with Power of the Wild and establish a potential better board in the future? Also for 1 mana more you can just play Whips of the Old Gods and summon 7 1/1s. All in all, the card is not very good. Let's head to the next one please. Next is the second new legendary, Prince Malchezaar. This one is a 5 mana neutral minion with 5/6 in stats. At the beginning of the game, if you have this minion in your deck, it would create 5 more legendary minions and add them to your deck. As a result of this, you will then start the game with 35 and not 30 cards. I've seen a lot of buts for the card, but while the effect is interesting, the downsides will outweigh the upsides here. First, let's have a look at the stats. The Prince will be a solid 5-drop when he will be played later on in the game, but he won't have any impactful effect on the game then, so you are basically playing a vanilla minion. Even decks that are focusing on value minions alone will not put a vanilla 5-drop in their deck when you have way better options in the 5 mana slots. Let's label the card as a solid 5-drop for now, nothing particular but of course playable. Next we have the card effect itself. First of all, you have to ask yourself, when do you even want to have more cards in the deck when you could potentially just play the legendaries from the start? In general, a deck is built in mind to have the best possible win rate and be the most efficient it could be. There are rarely any decks in any card game that want to go above the minimum amount of cards you are allowed to play. The reason behind this is that when you increase the amount of cards in a deck, you will also decrease the chance to get a specific card you need, and therefore reducing your overall efficiency. There's an exception when you play a middle or fatigue decks that sometimes play more cards than the minimum, but even then most are playing still at the minimum card amount. The Prince now adds 5 random cards that may or may not work with your deck and your overall game plan. Legendaries in general are quite strong, so you would assume that the overall value of the deck is also going up. But because you don't choose the minions you are getting, you are facing a roulette situation where you can't be sure whether or not the card was now helpful or not. Against the most prominent decks on the ladder that are exclusively playing aggro, tempo or mid-range at the moment, you will rarely go into fatigue and draw your whole deck, so you are pumping your deck up for the chance of getting a random card that might be helpful or not, and that you might draw or not. Control fatigue warriors, on the other hand, already winning against most decks when they go into fatigue, though there's also no need to go your deck even further. On one occasion though, the card will definitely help you, and that is when you are going into mirror matches with your fatigue or mill decks. If only your opponent is using the card, he will be 5 cards ahead, and that should bring him the victory. It is therefore highly likely that most of those decks will run the card, while the tempo and mid-range decks really don't care and should be thankful when other decks are pushing more random cards into their decks that might hinder them a lot. Our second to last card for today is the new Protect the King spell of the Warrior. For 3 mana you will summon a 1/1 with Taunt for every enemy minion. So basically it is an Unleash the Hound without a charge but with Taunt, and Blizzard tries to make Taunt Warrior a thing in the meta. Everyone will instantly see the potential of the card with Bolster that will increase the stats of every Taunt minion on your side, giving them +2/+2. That is a nice combo for 5 mana and can or cannot be building a huge board for you in no time. But you have to consider that only a few classes will have a constant board of minions that will give you enough value with the card. Most prominent are definitely Zoolog as well as all kinds of shamans and token druids. Against classes with a high amount of possible targets on the board, this spell might give you some great combat mechanics while also saving your hero from taking damage. On the other hand, you might run into classes or deck types that run a low amount of minions and the value will drop repeatedly. The difference to Unleash the Hound is that your minions won't have charge, therefore you can't push out extra damage if your opponent is only running 1 or 2 minions at the time on the board. The Hounds are also beasts and have great synergy effects on Hunter that will make the card way better than Protect the King. Besides the combination with Bolster, there's only the King's Defender weapon that will have some sort of extra effect when you have Taunt on the board. That is way too low to consider the card as a big meta changer. It will see some play but rare and few, and is right now with the current card pool nothing to get excited about. This spell has definitely potential and it might be that it will get way better with future card additions. The last card for today is Kazham, a new Warlock spell and a complete rip-off of a Magic the Gathering spell with the exact same effect and mana costs. For 5 mana you will summon a 1/1, a 2/2 and a 3/3 on the board. At first glance this is a solid spell for Warlock and you might thinking of adding this card to your current Zoolog deck. But wait, don't we have already a better spell for Zoolog that is spawning minions? Right, the Forbidden Ritual is currently in the deck and has way better synergy with Knife Juggler or Darkshire Consulman for example. The Kazham will give you 2 points of stats more than the Forbidden Ritual, but the synergy will be less successful. You will also want to have the smaller tokens in general for cards like the Power Overwhelming or Abusive Surgeon for cheap minion trade. Don't get me wrong here, the spell is definitely not bad, but it remains to be seen if it will be played alongside the Forbidden Ritual. It might find a place in Arenolog though. The deck type is always good for some crazy card choices and the spell could bolster the mid game of the deck a bit when you're not in full healing mode for your late game. Overall, there is not much to add here to the spell, a solid choice for most Warlock decks, but if it will fit has to be seen. And that's the conclusion for today's reviews of the new One Night in KARAZHAN cards. When more cards will be announced, I will do more card review videos, so if it was helpful, you might want to hit the subscribe button and don't miss the next episodes. Also, if you have different opinions about some cards, just comment below, I'm eager to hear your thoughts about the new cards. Until then, have a nice day guys.